What's up? Playing World of Warcraft for a bit, having an off-the-cuff discussion vlog thing, I guess. I'm about to record my Patreon Q&A for the week, and I was like, you know what? Let's talk about this other thing a bit. The big question on the channel right about now and whatnot about what happens after the current game on the RPG slot, because there's a certain amount of hype at the moment around a certain other game that could fit into that slot in the RPG slot, which you know, technically falls into a category that I don't consider to be an RPG, but still is best served in that time slot of 1 hour things. So like, while I do split hairs about whether or not something like Final Fantasy counts as an RPG, because I think that JRPGs kind of just don't count, because you don't roleplay in them, you just watch a story play out and then do some fights along the way, which is different, because that's what every game is. Especially now that every game has progression systems and leveling anyway. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. You can find me arguing that at greater length elsewhere. I'm not going to try to find where. I don't know. Probably several places by now. But anyway, yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a thing. And like, you know, decidedly, it is a good thing to play the hot new shit when it comes out here and there. And RPGs are often one of the somewhat underserved categories, admittedly. One that, oh god, I hate that this is in this game, kind of. At least this Facebook game. RPGs can be underserved sometimes, and there's also, like, some of the ones that do come out, you're like, I don't know about that. So, like, yeah, a proper AAA production, given how utterly rare they are as a monster for that category, they're worth looking at. And so I've kind of made a habit of playing the Final Fantasies when available, because it's like a special case to some extent, perhaps. But there's I'm kind of, part of me kind of just feels done. But I'm making this video because people keep asking, like, on a daily basis if I'm gonna play Final Fantasy VII Remake. Sorry, thinking of other Final Fantasies that I'm probably going to talk about today. And so part of me is just like, are we sure we want this? Is this really what we want? And like, so I kind of want to clarify that a little bit in my normal rambly, long-winded sort of way, I guess, about like whether or not that's the right call. One thing to point out, it's really worth pointing out, I think. I have played many JRPGs on this channel, and unless you count some Yakuza games, I have like a nearly 100% failure rate when it comes to ending the playthrough with a positive opinion of the JRPG at the end. And I think that's kind of worth noting. I pretty much exclusively end by not liking them. And the ones that surprise me by being something I do end up liking are usually the ones that do something really different. But even those sometimes are a big mess, like Valkyria Chronicles, beloved by many as far as I could tell, because I get, you know, the constant backlash for not having the correct opinion about Valkyria Chronicles. I kind of thought was trash. In particular, because like it doesn't have a real cover system. You can take cover in front of sandbags, and it still provides the same cover bonus. What the fuck is Valkyria Chronicles? Why do I have to manually open every cutscene one by one, and also the cutscenes are bad? And also, people that are bad at watching stories think that it blows right past them that the oppressed race are supposed to be the Jews, but in this magic sci-fi land, fantasy alternate timeline thing. Anyway, I think the only JRPG I've played on this channel besides Yakuza games, if you count them, which I kind of do, because the mechanical difference between a Yakuza game and a JRPG is basically non-existent. They just are the same genre, but the fact that people get stuck in the visual trappings of it looking kind of like GTA, because it's organized crime in the modern day and sometimes a gun shows up, makes people think, oh, it's an open world GTA clone or something, which is definitely not true. but somehow people come away with that being more accurate than JRPG, even though they're, you know, have random encounters that occasionally level you up, where that are just bridging the gaps between a series of entirely linear, basically visual novel segments. So it's like Tales of Zestiria and Yakuza are like the same genre. It's just that Yakuza is engaging in a way that the Tales game was less so, and so on. I'm just rambling on about all these things now. Apparently. Just going on about this stuff now. I didn't necessarily fully want to go into this topic, but I already have. How do I put this? It's not really the point anyway, so we can just move on with our lives, honestly, from the JRPG subject and all that. But I think Lost Dimension was like the only one that I've liked. That game's interesting.
What is your business here?
It had some flaws, as they are wont to do, but it did some pretty interesting shit. Because that was a cool game where you have your JRPG party doing turn-based combat, but it's turn-based strategy combat where you're going around in an environment instead of just standing across from each other. But it had this whole story mechanic where a randomly selected group of people in your party were traitors, and you had to try to flush them out, which was interesting. It would have been better if there was more narrative weight to that, like more aspect of actually having to identify the traitors based on their behavior and interrogation and so on, as opposed to like a weird mini game that gave you somewhat inconclusive information kind of stuff. But like it was interesting, and the combat was actually reasonably neat and also well paced because it didn't waste your time with hours. And that's another thing, is JRPGs have so much fucking filler. It was nice playing a game that was a series of pre-made missions that you play in consecutive order, and then the game just ends, which Valkyria Chronicles also had going for it. Because JRPGs that let you walk around an environment love to just pad that shit out with countless random encounters. I would, in Tales of Berseria and Tales of Zestiria, I would go to great lengths to run, because in those ones the random encounters are visible. I would go to great lengths to escape them all as best I could, and just burst through the story as fast as possible and beat the dungeon as quickly as possible, and then off camera go back and grind to catch my characters up with where they were supposed to be, because that was like better than having to do a let's play over like, hey, fighting a slime again, you know, the one from earlier, he's back. It's the same fight. I haven't meaningfully changed. He hasn't meaningfully changed. The environment hasn't meaningfully changed because the environment doesn't affect the fight. Wow, this is like a fucking trap right here. There we go. I was concerned. Like, this turn-based combat in a pre-made arena every time, so like the environment doesn't affect the fight, and like it's the same slime and I'm the same me, so like I'm just gonna press A a lot. That'll probably kill it. He's dead. All right, now fuck another one. Like a lot of that stuff. This is why my favorite RPG series made in Japan is the Dark Souls games. In particular, is the fact that like every single moment of the campaign is a like lovingly crafted series of set pieces where it's like, here is this location, we've built a brand new location for you, just like all the other ones, they're all new, and we've manually placed enemies in that location where we're going to express gameplay concepts one at a time. Like, here's a part where there's a guy in the front and then another guy overhead that's going to try to ambush you when you attack. Here's a guy around the corner that's going to attack you from behind. Here's a spellcaster plus a melee character. And like every encounter, as you play through your Dark Souls games, every encounter is a unique encounter in each one, which is what's so impressive, because they made Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Demon Souls, and Sekiro. That's 6 games in that general like level style. And like every single time, like they make a point to like not waste your time, and like the environment takes part in the combat. So like the actual moment-to-moment things, like each thing feels like a different scenario just from that part alone. But also like they're not going to be like fight the same enemy for the 30th time in a row. It's like, no, every single time that they're placed in a way in the environment that changes the fight, or like they're placed in a way so that they're like in a different combination of enemies that changes up the fight. And like in a lot of the JRPGs I've played, you can pretty much just button mash through the combat, not think at all. And the combat that is a lot of filler, and it's a lot of the same fights repeating over and over again, and so on. And so that's one bummer I've seen with the genre that makes me just kind of feel like I'm just done, and kind of just don't want to do it anymore. But anyway, let's talk about my history with JRPGs. That'll be some fun, right? And interestingly, it starts with a Final Fantasy game. My first JRPG ever, which was probably also my first anything RPG ever, was Final Fantasy X. And I loved it. And I've also never played it again since then. It came out when I was like 10 or 11 years old. And I got really far into it. I couldn't beat Sin, but like I loved the characters, and I loved the combat, and I loved everything about it, and the flashiness, and the bizarre aesthetic of everything was all new and fresh to me as like a 10 or 11 year old, which is not exactly the highest standard, but that's the impression I'm left with from those games, because I've never revisited them to squash my previous love or whatever the hell and find out actually it's bad or whatever. So I don't really remember. But I was engaged with it, but I just didn't beat it, which was kind of normal back then. Is when I was at that age, I would just not beat games on a regular basis because I had to share video game content with my brother, and like, so like you had like the split thing of like you have to like, you don't get a ton of time to yourself to be able to beat something that long because you have to share it with another person. But also the aspect of like it's pre-internet days, and I didn't necessarily fully dedicate myself to beating stuff because I wasn't doing Let's Plays for an audience, and I also didn't necessarily have the means to beat everything, because sometimes you just be like, I don't know, I can't beat it, I guess I'm fucked. I got to Sin, which is like, as far as I'm aware, is not the final boss fight, but narratively definitely feels like the final boss fight because it's like the point of everything you're doing. And it was just this giant, long, like kind of tedious thing, and then I would abruptly die to a one-shot kill attack at a certain phase, and then just have to start the entire long-ass thing over again. As a kid, I was definitely like, I don't really want to do it again. And to some extent, it's the same part of me that like doesn't want to restart a roguelike. Like part of me like plays a roguelike, and then I die, and then I'm like, oh, that was fun. I don't really want to start the whole thing over though. Kind of wish this was just a different genre entirely, which isn't entirely fair, but that's how people react to things. And it's definitely a fair reason to just be like, I don't really want to play this, because that's a personal stake thing. But yeah, as a kid, I think I probably gave it like a couple, maybe even 3 attempts, and I got like instantly killed by like the hyperdrive mega ultra attack something. And I'm like, I don't really want to start this giant long fight over again. Lady Unalesca might have been a similar problem, which, by the way, what a fucking story moment. That blew my mind as a kid, at least. Lady Unalesca might have been a similar barrier because of how, like, it was like an hour-long fight, but I beat her on my first try, so I didn't have to worry about that being a dead end for my playthrough back then. But yeah, I just didn't beat it. By the way, weird through line, with that being my first JRPG as far as I remember. My first Western RPG, as far as I remember, and also as far as I defined them, was KOTOR. Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars. I don't count Diablo or any dungeon crawlers because that's just a fundamentally different genre. Also, you don't roleplay in them, so they're also just not really RPGs. They're just dungeon crawlers. That's its own thing, really. They're as much RPGs as JRPGs are, which is to say, not. But anyway, I'm gonna get comments about that now. I've said it too many times. But I also didn't beat KOTOR as a kid. But that was different. I was fully fucking hooked to that game, and definitely would have beaten it if I could have. Because, man, that was blowing my mind back then. Like, I was like, games can be this? Because until then, I'd gone so many years of playing games. So many. I was like 14. Not really encountering a proper RPG until then, and I was like, oh, I can do things in the game, not just go through it like a theme park. I don't understand. So that was blowing my mind, but I was devastated when like the big plot twist happened, and then I get back to the ship and I'm talking to Karth, and then it just stops. The conversation just completely stops right there, and never proceeds. And I'm like, and every time I restart the game, it never gets past that point. It just never proceeds, and I return the game and get a new copy of the game, and that doesn't work. And I try moving my save to another person's console to see if that'll fix the problem, and I can't because the saves for that game were bigger than the memory card for the original Xbox. And I'm like, I guess I'll never beat KOTOR, and so I still haven't. Whoops. But my first JRPG and my first RPG, Western RPG, I never beat. Funny how that goes. And I loved both of them at the time. But anyway, time passes. Final Fantasy XII comes out, but I've already moved on to the PS3, or more accurately, the Xbox 360, and then eventually the PS3. But I wasn't really using my PS2 anymore, / maybe didn't have one anymore, I don't remember really. So I never played Final Fantasy 12. Final Fantasy 11 and 14 were MMOs, which I'm still curious about trying 14 in the context of MMOs, and like maybe Andrew could be my guide to that, because like he's played a bunch of that already. So maybe one day we'll cover 14 in some capacity, because I'm curious. But I've never played 14, but boy did I play 13, and here I was older and wiser and had very different tastes than I did at the time, but also maybe 13 was a departure if you were somebody who liked 10, which was all I had to go on at that time. I'm about to die. This is what happens when you don't pay enough attention, because you're doing a little weird ranty podcast that's going to piss off JRPG audience members, but maybe that's also the goal? I don't know. Part of the goal here is to illustrate how I might be an outsider and also a dissenting voice that you don't necessarily want. Because I'm trying to gauge here, that's the thesis at the end of this, is should I play Final Fantasy VII Remake? That's the big thing. That's the big shit going on here. I should make a password. The password is New Yevon. There. Now when I include a poll, and I'm gonna be like, what's the password? And you have to type New Yevon, NEWYEVON, to confirm that you've watched this far into the video. Write that shit down, and then you can like go into the poll, and then when you're filling out the thing, I know whether or not you actually listened, or if you just went straight to the poll and didn't listen to any of the things I had to say, and then just kind of fucking went anyway. It's like this is a super filtered poll where like 3 people will get to actually vote, and the data will be useless, and I don't know. Maybe this just counts as podcast material, and that's value in its own way, or whatever. But anyway, Final Fantasy 13 came out. That was later. Let's see, FFX 111 or III, technically 2009, the same year as Yakuza 3, which I just played. That's interesting. I wonder if it looks, if I go back to Final Fantasy 13, if it'll look as dated as Yakuza was looking in certain ways. Because in my mind, that is like a pristinely beautiful game. Like, that's the thing it had going for it, is its smoothness, and just how, like, it's just flat. I don't know how to describe it. It's how I like, I think about like Xbox 360 era, like of Dead or Alive like 4 and whatnot, and be like, this game's beautiful, or even sooner like Dead or Alive 3 and whatnot, being like, this is the best a game can ever look. How is this possible? I do, in my head, Final Fantasy 13 still looks really good, because I've never looked back at it again. But anyway, Final Fantasy 13 comes around, and it's like, okay, we're doing turn-based combat again, like 10, but maybe I didn't really want to have turn-based combat in its old state, so the potentially controversial remix of the combat comes out, and I'm like, you know what, I'm kind of game for this. Like, I think back to turn-based combat, and like, it's kind of stale, because one of the issues with turn-based combat is the repetition of the genre often means that like the individual fights just aren't that impactful and aren't that interesting. There are versions of turn-based combat that have been very interesting in the past, but they're not, the ones that I think of aren't Japanese. Some of the ones that come to mind are XCOM and Darkest Dungeon, which are both games I have issues with for their structural campaign, the structures of their campaigns on certain levels, especially Darkest Dungeon just being a fucking forever game. But at least when I played the early access version, that was much shorter. There was a period of playing Darkest Dungeon where, oop, there we go, shrink them down, where every single fight was so tense. Like, every action felt like it mattered, and like the choices I had ahead of me were interesting, and the moves I could do were interesting, and like XCOM has the thing where, like Lost Dimension, where the environment affects the combat, and so if that continually kind of recontextualizes your choices, so while you just have like a handful of attacks per character, the choices of where to put them and how to have them interact with each other and how to have them cover each other and how, like, what you're gonna do when you, with your turn, when you have like this chance to have like 3 different people all take a move and how they can all complement each other and so on, is way more compelling than like Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE, the Persona / Shin Megami Tensei spinoff that had Fire Emblem characters morphed beyond all recognition. Wow. In this game, you do random encounters over and over again, and the enemies have an elemental weakness, so you just press the one attack you have that's that, and then you watch 30 seconds of cutscenes play every time you do an attack, and you never think, the enemy has a weakness, you click the weakness, key going hole, do it again, do it again. Do it again. Do it again. You're level 68 now. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. It's so fucking boring. And you might be wondering, like, you're playing World of Warcraft. What are you talking about? I'm like, I get it. Yes. But I'm not doing a Let's Play of World of Warcraft, generally speaking. I am with Andrew, but we just talk about random shit. This is a podcast game. When I do a series on a World of Warcraft game, I just talk over it and don't really pay any attention to it. And when I'm playing it in my free time, I'm listening to podcasts or other YouTube content that isn't very visually focused, where I can, like, just kind of like, I'm burning through my backlog of YouTube videos while feeling productive in an evening after a long day's work. Which, if that's how you play JRPG, is good for you, but fuck if it's not agony to do a JRPG playthrough when they're just, like, wasting my time for hours and hours with filler. And I'm like, boy, sure feels good to vamp over this for hours, and then I criticize the game, and then people get mad at me for criticizing the game, and it's like, I'm sorry, it's just it's the life in front of me. This is 100% of what I'm experiencing right now is the fact that this game is wasting my time, and I'm not supposed to acknowledge that, because the people who are likely watching a playthrough of a game are the ones that think it's good. And so if you're basically, every time I criticize any game during any playthrough, I'm just taking a risk, because you're increasingly turning the people against you. So you're supposed to put on kid gloves and, like, act like you love everything is like a formula people use, because that's like a way to, like, just keep everyone watching, is by not offending anyone in your audience and just, like, acting like everything you ever play is just perfect, basically. That's the thing that people do a lot, which is also kind of fucky, by the way, because the premise of Let's Plays being in any way legal is the idea that it's transformative and that it's fair use, and the idea of fair use is that it's supposed to be for criticism. So criticizing games is actually built into, like, the spine of the very genre that I am in, even though it sometimes feels like I'm the only person that remembers that. You're not just here to, like, let the audience I forgot to do that. You're not here to let the audience experience the game, like, for free, just for free or whatever, and then that's it, and be a conduit to that. Like, you are actually supposed to be critical of said game in order to really make it fair use and whatnot, especially if you're not editing it in a transformative way and so on. Like, that's kind of the basis of all this, but whatever. That's a topic for another day, which I'll say 3 times or 30 times in this video. You know what, maybe this will be a replacement for this week's Patreon Q&A. It'll functionally be like its own extended little podcast thing. Sure. And aligned with a poll and all that, or will it? What if there's more passwords? Hope you're writing things down. I'm just here to torture my audience so that they have to earn a Final Fantasy VII playthrough, apparently. Apparently. But anyway, because of that repetition and time wastiness of JRPG combat, I kind of was ready when Final Fantasy 13 was like, yo, remix combat, you basically just press the auto battle button and your guys just kind of go. They just kind of attack. And instead, in this new fast-paced combat, you then do a thing where every single person in your party can change classes on the fly. And so you change their classes on the fly. And like, so I'm like, that was actually interesting to me, kind of compelling. It's like, oh, in this mode, this person is a tank, and this person is a healer, and this person is a support. So like, this is my don't die class configuration, where like Fang, I think, would be my DPS, or I mean would be my tank, and someone else would be like Vanille would be healing Fang, and like I think somebody could like put support stuff on Fang to keep her alive. So I'd be like my hunker down phase. I click this button and they'd become those classes. And then I had like another phase I'd switch to when it was time to like open up on the boss, and it was like, ah, this person's gonna be in a Ravager mode where they just tear into somebody. And this person's going to be like the other one that complemented that or something, because there was like a create weaknesses class and an exploit weaknesses class or something like that. Like I was like, this is actually kind of an interesting combat system, which I'm not used to seeing. Because in the like almost 10 years between Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy IX, I had already learned that I don't like JRPG turn-based combat that much. Not because turn-based combat is inherently bad, but because JRPGs are frequently unambitious in their innovation of that particular genre's combat, and so they kind of just do a basic template and just kind of keep it going. I find that one of the only ways to make the turn-based combat, that's the stale, generic type of turn-based combat, interesting, is usually to underlevel myself by rushing the story too fast, and then it's like, oh god, I'm totally not supposed to be this level, and I'm kind of fucked. Let's see if I can eke out a win anyway, is often the only way to make it interesting, because if you're the intended level, it's often like, and like there was a thing where like I would, in Tokyo Mirage sessions, I would fight a boss, and I'd be 5 levels underleveled, and I was just like, he would just one-shot people in my party. I'm like, fuck, Jesus Christ, alright, fine, I'll go back and farm. And I would just hang out and kill some mobs for like an hour mindlessly, wasting my time listening to a podcast between episodes. And then I'd come back the next episode, and I would have a really easy time with the boss, and just crush him. And then people would complain I'm over-leveled, and I'm like, I didn't farm for that long. It's like, why does so much work of this genre go into having to like laser focus yourself into being the correct level so that the fights are fun? Because the fights are either unfair in your favor or unfair against your favor, and some of those, depending on how well balanced a particular JRPG is. Like, so much of your power comes not from your tactics, but what level you are. And I found that was true for Tokyo Mirage sessions, is like a few levels above or a few levels below the boss, which was very easy to achieve sometimes, instantly meant that you were either going to have a boringly easy fight or a crushingly undoable fight. And the fact that the meta progression is more important than the fight itself is kind of boring. Like, I want to beat the boss by like solving him and making choices that are the right thing to figure it out, and you know figure it out. How do I keep this party alive while handling this thing, while handling that thing, and so on? Like, that's, problem solving is what's satisfying about anything in games, actually. Like, that's kind of the backbone of most of gaming, is a lot of flexing your problem solving brain, and that game failed to do that, generally speaking. So yeah, being hit with this new system where your turn-based combat was suddenly like kind of not turn-based, it was happening completely in real time, but also it was all about the meta level of like, okay, the choice of what to do is not interesting. Like, the tank will do the tanky thing, the spellcasting DPS will do the spellcasting DPS-y thing, the melee DPS will do the melee DPS thing, the healer will do the healing thing. Like, telling them to do that manually, fucking boring. It's like telling every member of your CRPG party to do what they're supposed to do every single turn. And it's like, no. Most sane people will probably just turn the AI on and be like, yeah, cast offensive spells during combat, please. You're the offensive spellcaster. I'll tell you to do a specific thing if I feel like a really specific thing needs to happen, but otherwise, you know, do the thing you're supposed to do, because I don't want to manually tell 6 people what to do every second of every fight, which is what it's like to manually control all of them in a CRPG, because that's what they are. That's what turn-based combat is often like. If it's not interesting, it's just like, why am I doing all the legwork here when what you are supposed to do is so obvious? So instead having a bunch of loadouts of classes where like, in this one Hope is a this thing, and in this one Fang is a this thing, and being able to hot swap between those was actually really interesting. In part because it also was challenging at times. So oh, this is interesting. Here's the fatal flaw of Final Fantasy 13 though. I hated everyone. I hated everyone. Do you know how hard it is for me to hate everyone in a game? Like, I am generally pretty easy to please when it comes to party members, especially since I love conflict between party members. Like, I like it when party members have conflict with each other because that makes the narrative more interesting. So, just because someone's contrarian or whatever doesn't mean that I don't like them. Like, I liked Sarah and Morrigan in Dragon Age, like the contrarian characters that argue with you and other characters all the time and are all like constantly frictiony and all that. Like, that was part of the fun. But every single character except the dad is completely insufferable in Final Fantasy 13. And on top of that, this is all common complaints, but it's just this mountain of just lingo. Like, it has one of the worst intros I've ever seen to a game, where people are like, the Fal'Cie and the Lil Seed made a Kul'Cie with the Seath, and some of these words are still in my head, and if I really pushed myself, I could probably accurately say what they all are, but I'm not gonna try that hard. But like, there's so many nonsense words being thrown at you rapidly in the intro that basically none of it effectively does storytelling, because you don't understand what's even happening during it, and you have to open a glossary to learn what these words mean. And then all of the characters, when you learn who they are totally insufferable, horrible people, and most of their disagreements are like nonsense, and all their personalities are revolting, and I don't like being with them, and none of them are fun, but also none of them are like assholes in interesting ways, and I don't have anyone I'm on the side of or I'm rooting for. It's pretty much just the dad, because it's just a dad, and he wants his boy back, and it's like, oh, and like Saz was pretty alright, but like, I hate lightning, I hate snow, I hate Hope. Fang was alright, and Vanilla was Manic Pixie Dream Girl's kind of exhausting, but I don't remember it being a massive problem. But like, I basically only really kind of liked Fang and Saz, which are very clearly the most unimportant characters in that party of those 6 characters. Like, it's very clear that the other people, if you listed them in descending order of importance, the bottom people would probably be Saz and Fang, which is also likely why you never see them again, because they just weren't necessarily important to the narrative of that game, which was a bummer, because they're the only people I was kind of rooting for, because everybody else, I just wanted to die. Like, it's interesting to be in a narrative where you're on like this road trip where every single character, you're like, if they died, I'd be like, oh, and that's about it, as opposed to be like, no, not that guy, he had so much to live for and so many hopes and dreams and like familial connections to other people that I also cared about, and I'm gonna be sad that those people are sad because he's sad and he's dead, and oh man, this just does so much. Like, there's the idea of somebody dying in like Game of Thrones or any of the other narrative you get invested in is like, oh no, not only will the character I care about die, but like, it's gonna affect these other characters I also care about in this web of characters. But like, in 13, I kind of wanted everyone to die. So like, while the combat was actually kind of interesting, I wanted every character to die. So anyway, I beat Mecha Pope or whatever the fuck, and then the game, and I thought that was the ending, because like, There's like, oh, it's the villain. Let's go beat the villain. And I beat the villain. And then they're like, now the real game starts. I'm like, what do you mean the story? Isn't the story over? Isn't he the bad guy? And like, no, I said the word orphan. That'll come up later, I guess. And it's like, what? They're just gonna make up a new villain now? The story's starting over again? And I was just like, my Steam was gone. I was totally lost on Steam, and then they dumped me out into an open world green plane. The generic location of every JRPG is an open green field with monsters just randomly in it doing whatever the fuck, basically. And it's like, I don't know, frolic amongst the monsters, get into random encounters. You love that, right? And I'm like, maybe the target audience does, but I don't think I do. And I was like, my Steam's gone. I don't really want to play anymore. I've put up with these people for longer than I thought I would. So I stopped playing, and I looked up the rest of the cutscenes online and just watched like a Final Fantasy 13 the movie thing and skipped to where I left off and just kind of saw the conclusion. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, why not? Sure, that's I guess that's the ending. That's fine. Now I know where 13.2 will start, because for some reason I played 13.2, having not liked 13. Why did I do that? Wait, there was a reason, wasn't there? Oh, wait, there was a reason actually. Right. I was working would imply I was getting paid. I was writing for a video game review website or something. Not even that, it's like a generic tech website that was basically just somebody's attempt to pad their resume so they could get a job at Amazon. And I was doing volunteer writing there just because I was already had my own blog that I like to write on, and this was like a chance to get stuff to get seen a little bit more, so I was like, fine. And it did seem to lead to some results. Like, we got a free copy of the Devil May Cry HD collection, a free copy of the GoldenEye remake that was bad, and in this case I got a free copy of Final Fantasy 13 too for review purposes. So it was a review copy, that's why I played it, now I remember. And a few problems came up. One, combat was instantly hilariously easy compared to the previous game. So while I think it still had the same class changing system, if I can remember correctly, it was completely mindless now, so nothing mattered. So I slept walk through the game's combat for its entire runtime. So the only perk I had of 13 was gone now, which is having a kind of interesting combat system, because that was just ripped out from under me. But also, all the old characters were gone, which I count as a win, because those characters all sucked. So, okay, sure. All those characters are gone, now I'm these other characters instead. That's kind of an improvement. I would have liked to go on a buddy cop adventure with just Saz and Fang, but fine. Lightning's gone, that's a win. Because Lightning was the... No, Lightning wasn't the worst of all. Hope might have been the worst one. Hope and Snow were pretty awful. They were kind of the worst. But 13.2 is a time travel storyline. Oh no! Because I like me a time travel storyline. Like, I watch Doctor Who on purpose. I'm game for this shit. But, like, it has to have, like, some kind of rules that it follows. Or in the case of Doctor Who, like, break its rules for the sake of some kind of fun. But, like, that's partly because Doctor Who is, like, a thing that's been around for 50 years, and if it tried to keep the same coherent rules forever, it would never be able to do that. I'm drowning, by the way, and I don't know why. I think we bugged out, and I'm a little freaked out by that. I better not drown in the middle of this mission. I'm clearly not underwater, am I? Why am I drowning? Maybe that's supposed to be a progress meter. I'm like, what the fuck's happening? Oh, I'm drowning! Oh, fuck, I'm drowning. And I died. Okay, that quest bugged out, and instead of being on a thing, I was drowning the whole time. And I thought maybe it'll finish before I drown, but it didn't. Was I supposed to drink something to not drown? Did I miss it because I'm multitasking? I don't know. But yeah, 13.2, it's not just a bad time travel storyline. It's one of the worst time travel storylines I've ever played, and the entire villain's motivation is tied to the time travel, but all of that is built entirely around a narrative that makes absolutely no sense. The mechanics of the time travel make no sense. The villain's motivation makes no sense. The like plot twist about the tragic thing that's happening, that's the motivation for the villain, makes no sense. Everything about it makes no sense. There's multiple times you interact with the time travel that are like actively insultingly dumb. And so like the entire story is bad. And like I think I remembered thinking that Sarah and I don't remember the guy's name. Let's call him Noid. Sarah and Noid were less annoying than the people in the first game, but they weren't great either. I didn't really like them or any of the story of the game, and it was built around time travel mechanics that were awful. And I'm just I beat it though. I beat it because it was pretty easy and not that long. So I did beat Final Fantasy 13 too, which was very easy to beat because the game was never challenging. I only died once in the entire playthrough, and it's because a boss fight had a countdown to like an instant kill mechanic that I fell victim to once, and that's all that happened. And then, other than that, and it was kind of because I wasn't paying attention to the combat enough, because I was so zoned out, because the combat was so boring, that having an instant death thing that I was supposed to do a specific action on a specific turn in order to survive was a great way to be like, oh fuck. It's like the World of Warcraft problem where I'll like fuck up a quest because the quests are so monotonous that I'll fuck up when the quest suddenly demands something of me that's more intense than whatever was going on before, because I was like, oh sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Was I supposed to do something that involved paying attention? My bad. That was basically how the one time I died in all of Final Fantasy 13 too, because it just was so unengaging. But the narrative was like actively a problem in every possible way, and I hated it like a lot. Like I completely hated the narrative, basically from front to back, and that was before I even knew that they were going to reintroduce Hope into the game, because motherfucker Hope shows up, the least good character in all of 13, just comes back and he's like, hey, I still suck. And he introduces one of the biggest plot points that ever happens, which is fucking minor spoilers for one boss fight, I guess, but like there's a time, one of the dimensions you go to is like the Terminator timeline, where like Judgment Day has happened and machines have killed all of humanity and everyone's dead, and Hope apparently is the person who made the machine. And during the boss, you're fighting the god, the big machine or whatever, and you can yell things during the boss fight for some reason, a mechanic that never has been used before and will never be used again. Every X number of turns you can shout something, and you have to shout the correct thing, because if you shout the correct thing, then Hope will not make the machine and not doom the world, because apparently Hope is in the past looking at the future and is looking at you fighting this machine, and like even though Hope can see the future somehow, the fact that he can see the future and all of humanity is dead because of a creation he created, that's not enough to make him not destroy all of humanity. And then the fact that he's watching you in a death battle against the thing that he created is not enough to make him in the past not continue making said thing. But you being in a boss fight against said thing and then shouting, Hope, you asshole, don't make this guy in the past, you saying that is the trigger that makes him not make the thing. Because like he already can see the future, and that he's gonna create a machine that's gonna destroy all of humanity, and he can already see that you, his friend, are in a battle to the death against his own creation. But those two things are not enough to make him not make the thing. It's the fact that you said, Hope, you dummy, don't do that. That's the thing that made him not make the thing, apparently. Because this game is made for fucking lunatics, apparently, and made by lunatics, and you know what? Gotta say, kind of the standard I've seen for the franchise, so I guess I'm the asshole for being surprised. 13.2 was garbage. 13.3 came out and they were like, yo, we brought lightning back and we're so fucking hype on Lightning being back. We put her in the title of the game. Like, damn, Lightning returns. And I'm like, wow, you know who's not going to return? Me, because Lightning fucking was awful, and I don't want her back. I was really weirded out how she kept getting put in everything. Like, she was like, wow, and a cameo from Lightning, beloved character Lightning. And I'm like, she's a plank of wet wood. What the fuck is this character? And then they're like, oh man, we took her emotions away because she's like an oracle of God or something in this game. And like, there's a time limit before the world ends, I think is what's going on. And like she's an emotionless oracle of God or something. I didn't play it. And I'm like, what do you mean you took the emotions out of Lightning? What the fuck does that mean? Are you implying she had emotions before? Because like, you could have fooled me. She was so busy being fucking stoic and flat and fucking emotionless. But cool, I'm glad you were able to like get a fucking brand deal with like a clothing company to advertise her. What Lightning was the most baffling trilogy of things that happened. So I never played 13.3 for obvious reasons at this point. Hey, look, I'm not drowning this time. The game remembered to not drown me, so that's good. I guess technically between Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy 13, I did play Final Fantasy Tactics, which I also enjoyed. I can't tell you anything about it narratively, but it does fit the stuff I said before, which is that you're making interesting choices and whatnot, because it's a tactics game. Honestly, my combat of JRPGs in general would probably be improved if more of them were turn-based tactics games instead of, you know, turn-based two people stand across from each other and smack each other till one of them dies games. But, you know, turn-based combat can be interesting in its own right if you do it better, but a lot of them don't seem ambitious enough to do it. But I played Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. I can't tell you anything about the narrative. I think it starts with like some kids playing snowballs in a field, and then maybe you get like sucked into an alternate dimension to fight monsters like Warriors of Virtue with the kangaroos. I don't know. I don't remember what the narrative was, or even if it really had much of one. I know that this is, I would later learn this is like the kid-friendly portable spin-off version of Final Fantasy Tactics, the PS1 game, which I've never played to this day still, which I guess is supposed to be darker. There was one interesting mechanic, which is the judges. Your judges would ban certain actions. You can't do a fire attack in this mission. You can't heal or whatever. And that would like be an interesting little spin that would prevent you from always using the same strategies every match. Kind of like right now in Overwatch, there's the hero pool where characters get banned. And like every week different heroes are banned in Overwatch, which means you kind of have to adapt to like a new layout of people and all that. So like maybe that was an element of that, but I don't know. I played that on Game Boy Advance. I was a kid. I'm not gonna like stand by any opinions on Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, but yeah, technically the first two games called Final Fantasy that I played, I liked. And the first one was 10, and the second one was Tactics Advance, but I don't remember shit from Tactics Advance. Probably because I was always multitasking and playing it in the car while being driven around as a kid and not having agency and all that. But anyway, 12 came out before 13, didn't play it. 14 and 11 I didn't play. So then we jump forward to me being a Let's Player, because all of this happened before I was a Let's Player, so there's no footage, sorry to disappoint you, of me being very angry at Final Fantasy 13-2 or anything like that. That was all off camera. But then Final Fantasy 15 was coming out, and the demo came out, and I played it, and I was like, this is somewhat interesting, like, visual representation of a world, I guess, or something. I mean, I'm game. Like, I'll play a Final Fantasy game. I'm a Let's Player. I got this. This is my job. It's fine. Let's do this. But I played the demo, and I was having an alright time-ish, except for that I got to a cave at the end where every single enemy inflicted poison on you that would drop your entire party's health to 1. And there was just like no winning. Like, it was incredibly tedious because I was just like reviving and reviving and reviving and getting back up over and over again while everyone constantly had 1 health, so everyone was dying over and over again. And I was like, this is, this mechanic's kind of infuriating. And like maybe I was supposed to stock up on antidotes first, but you know, I was just playing a demo for like half an hour. I wasn't really fully prepared for that stuff. But anyway, I was like, okay, fine. Final Fantasy 15 is coming out. Probably going to cover that when it comes out. I think buying or pre-ordering 15 might have come with a free copy of Type 0, or they made Type 0 HD edition, because it used to be a handheld game, to like hype up for 15 or something like that. Because I think it was the previous game that was done by the game director of 15. And I remembered, oh yeah, right. 15, because I remember this from the back in the before days. There used to be there was supposed to be a Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy 13 Agito, or Agito, and then Final Fantasy 13 Versus. And both of those games weren't canceled, but didn't come out being called those games. Instead, we got a Final Fantasy 13 trilogy that was Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 13 2 and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13 3. Which were not Versus and Agito, because Agito became Final Fantasy Type 0, and Versus became Final Fantasy 15. So, fucking, lo and behold, I ended up playing the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy ultimately anyway, because I did play Agito and Versus. They just became new games eventually. Final Fantasy Type 0 is a bad game. Just like full stop. Its combat's incredibly awkward and janky and weird feeling, likely because it was made for a handheld console with very limited controls available. I don't even know if the console it was made for even had a second joystick or whatever. It very much reminded me of when I played Kingdom Hearts 300 and something over 2 days, the stupid one with the sea salt ice cream, where like my hand, like in that game I felt like I don't have the tools necessary to control this character on this tiny shitty DS where I'm trying to play a 3D game and all that. Final Fantasy Type 0's combat was really awkward. It had a lot of irritating meta progression systems where you had to do weird training things to grind and so on, which I was able to exploit, thankfully. So whenever I was underleveled, I'd put them in the training bunker and then like set the clock of the console forward like a week, and then the magic would be higher level, that kind of shit. And that would like be how I'd catch up when I was underleveled or something. But you had 13-ish characters in that game because they were really liked the number 13 around then, which is funny because the game wasn't called Final Fantasy 13 anymore, but there was 13 characters you controlled. They all had names that were analogs to the various cards in a suit of cards, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they're like Ace and like Zwei and Try and whatever the fuck, or Triple or Deuce or whatever the fuck. Like they had like analogs because they didn't want to just call them all numbers, although some of them were just called numbers. And then there was like King, Queen, and Jack and all that. You just rapidly would swap between all these characters and do a bunch of fighting. The story was horrible. Like, utterly garbage. Like, utterly garbage. Like, the combat, at least, was like, kind of neat sometimes, as you did this bizarre system of swapping between this massive roster of characters that would then die and be replaced by another character, and you had to, like, switch between all these different characters on the fly, because, like, there wasn't necessarily a way to revive them mid-mission, so you had to, like, basically hope your lives didn't run out during a mission, and be able to like also adapt to the different move sets of each character on the fly. Like there's some interesting things about the combat a little bit, but the narrative was the worst. You engaged in a relatively generic war story that had some incredibly melodramatic moments that would get hyper dark, but then the characters would often not really be willing to acknowledge most of that. But also, most importantly, it's about like, oh, and then the Fire Nation attacks. Like, it's like Avatar, where there's like 4 factions that are at each other, so you're just having a really mostly boring narrative about like how there's just like 4 powers that are having at each other, with the fire one being the big bad one. And we just got this. It's always like, this is what's good for the war effort. Oh, this is what we got to do next in the war. And it's like that's just like always a really boring context for character motivation and moment-to-moment storytelling, because they're just like, they can just have you do anything and be like, oh yeah, this is necessary for the supply chains or something for the war. This is the war thing you gotta do next. Like those kinds of war narratives, unless handled very carefully, are just the most generic, bland thing ever, because it's just a series of random events that you're just told are what's necessary next for the war, until finally you do a society, you do a fight that's you're told is decisive for the war, and then it ends. And that's a lot of very bland war stories in games and movies and whatnot. Like you have to hope that they pull through with some other thing that's the hook for the narrative, because the war cannot be the hook for the narrative, but the war is kind of what you focus on. That and the vague existential crisis of what it's like to be a cocoon drone, because you all are members of this horrible thing where basically a living city creates you like antibodies to fight the other living cities, and so you're all these like no free will like drones being sent out, like you're the autoimmune system of the city itself, which is really fucking dark and creepy, and a better game would have done something interesting with that, but Type 0 was boring with it, and I was eternally frustrated with that, specifically because it should have been like so much more interesting. But the way that they voice act and storytell, and the way that they characterize their characters as being flat and emotionless a lot of the time, and a lot of the way that they deal with these things makes it way less interesting than it should be. But then things get really shitty, because you beat the game, and I guess we're spoilers for Type 0 because that's just where we are today. You beat the red guys, the fire faction or the wolf faction or whatever they were. They were like I think they were like an element and an animal was like how they were represented. And out of fucking nowhere, you find out that a guy named Sid, you know, Sid from various Final Fantasy games, but that, you know, he's usually just some guy named, I think this is the voice actor of Invader Zim. Just fucking, maybe not. Maybe he's just doing a Zim voice. Anyway, Sid just shows up, and he was basically never mentioned and not a character, and you've never seen him before in all of Type 0, but turns out he's activated the Doomsday device, and we gotta stop him from ending all of creation. And so the entire party all heroically sacrifice themselves to, like, they go through a weird hell dimension that was like the most boring level of the entire game, and tedious and long and awful feeling. And then when you're done with that, you reached God Sid, just super mecha ultra deity mode Sid, where he's like over-designed and crazy looking because he's a Final Fantasy boss. And the only way to beat him is to sacrifice the lives of all of your characters one by one in all-out battle, where they all die one by one to hit its weak spots or something. And then the entire party dies to defeat a guy that you've never heard of before. And also, the only two emotional characters in the entire game, there's like a red-haired lady and a blue-haired guy. They're kind of, the guy was kind of irritating, but whatever. Like, you kind of were thankful to have characters that had some emotion and weren't just mindless drones from the main suit of cards. His name was Machina, I think. Machina and Girl Machina, Machina's love interest or whatever. You just find them in a dungeon randomly as crystal people. And you're like, if you play 13, you're like, oh, that's what happened when Sarah, as a l'Cie, completed her... No, the l'Cie is the city, I think. I think she was a fal'Cie, or whatever. Whatever. She completes her bond. In Sarah in 13 completed her bond, and that made her do a crystal statue, because that's like the good ending for a fal'Cie or a l'Cie or whatever. I don't remember what they are. Seath are what are the monsters. I remember that much. I don't remember which one's a l'Cie and which one's a fal'Cie. If you don't complete your oath, you become a Seath and turn into a monster in 13. And if you complete your oath, you turn into a statue of blue crystal, and then then you're just stuck that way. So Machina and Raven, Sarah? No, not Sarah. They're a statue now. You never see them again. You never speak to them again, as far as I remember. That's just the end of the narrative. Like, they were in the story for a while, but then you randomly see them as statues, and you're like, oh, I guess they're gone. Well. And that's like right before you sacrifice yourself against Sid, and then so like everyone dies, but for reasons you largely don't understand, because like Machina turned into a crystal off camera, and Sid unleashed the death weapon off camera. Get used to the term off camera. It's going to come up later in the other game we're about to talk about. But like Sid and Machina both did shit off camera, and that's why Machina's dead and Sid has to die, and you all have to die fighting Sid. And then the game ends, and it's just over. And you're like, what? Where are my answers? And the game's like, now play the game again. Play the entire game again to see it from a different perspective, and maybe it'll make sense again. And I'm like, fuck you. No, you earn it. You have to have, like, intrigue and an interesting narrative. Like, there's versions of doing this right and versions of doing this wrong. And, like, Nier games, Nier and Nier Automata, were both good at having a narrative that was interesting and compelling on its surface, and then offering additional playthroughs that would then add layers to said narrative to make it even more interesting, and like subvert what you thought you knew about the first time through and stuff like that. But Type 0 just doesn't tell you a story. You get to near the end of the game and all the important plot points happen completely off camera and are never explained, and then you just die. And then it's like, play the whole game again, and I'm like, fuck you, Final Fantasy. So I didn't. Because what the fuck? It also wasn't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think it was an abridged playthrough like it is in a Nier Gestalt, and especially Nier Automata. In Nier Automata, the other routes aren't even really the same thing as playing the game again in many ways, because they're hyper abridged. Yeah, in Type 0, as far as I'm aware, you just had to play the entire game again. Like the whole game. But along the way, certain missions would be replaced by different missions that tell you different pieces of the story. And you're like, whoa, crazy. This changes everything. But like, that's such an investment to play the entire game again when you didn't bother giving me a story the first time. That'd make me want to play the entire game again. Like, what a massive misstep. And so then I found out that Final Fantasy 15 was by the same guy. And I'm like, oh no. His last story was awful, so that doesn't bode well for him getting like a major release in the form of Final Fantasy 15, but okay, fine. So Final Fantasy 15 came out, and I played Final Fantasy 15. Also, password number 2. The second password is dilly dally shilly shally. Dilly dally shilly shally. Dilly dally shilly shally. This is where I mentioned, by the way, that Final Fantasy VII Advent Children is a movie I have watched, so I know what happens in that. I didn't just watch it, it was like one of my favorite movies for a while, which might be really baffling, but like, I don't know, it was like really cool video game cutscenes, and I like video games, and at the time I thought I liked Final Fantasy, even though I'd never played 7, and you got these cool characters. Like, I really liked Tifa's battle against Muscle Sephiroth in the church. It was like a really cool battle. Like, I think that battle's fucking rad. And Rude, I like Rude. No, I like Reno, sorry. Reno and Rude I like in general, but I like Reno's design, and I wanted to see him do stuff. But he's just a minor character in that thing. And I'm like, oh, Reno's cool. I want to see whatever he's in. But then I just never played Final Fantasy VII anyway. Reno's a character I'd like to meet more, I think. Because he was fun in Advent Children. Which is where dilly dally shilly shally comes from. Dilly dally shilly shally. Dumbest line. I think I went back once I had hey boss fight. I think I went back once I had like a digital copy of the movie, or not digital. I was running the DVD in my computer, and I had a progress bar all of a sudden, and I think I realized then that the final boss fight against Sephiroth is half the runtime of the movie. Or specifically, the city battle of that movie is half of the duration of the entire film. Like, the film is like an hour and a half long or whatever, and like right at 45 minutes in, like the exact halfway point is when they get to the city and they do the big fight. I'm including the entire end set piece, not just the Sephiroth fight. Like, the part where the whole party member, all the party fights, like, was it a behemoth or something? And like, there's a part where they all like have to throw Cloud higher and higher, and a big like friendship is magic, everyone's here to help each other moment, where they're all here to help each other, and they throw Cloud higher and higher and higher so he can like stab something hard. That entire city segment is 50% of the film, as far as I can tell. Everything else is rapid fire setup for that. But anyway, I watched Final Fantasy Spirits Within and Final Fantasy Advent Children growing up. Spirits Within I liked when it first came out, and I've never watched it since, so I don't know if I would be able to put up with it again now, because I've heard that's really bad. But I think I've also heard Advent Children's supposed to be bad, but it was... I liked it at the time when I was like a 17-year-old or whatever, because it was like, wow, this is rad, and it's cool, and it's anime, wee! And that it worked on that level for me, I guess, as a teenager, which I guess was its goal. And also, the 13-minute Sephiroth theme from that film was my World of Warcraft soundtrack. I would just play World of Warcraft when I was a teenager with that song looping, because it was kind of like a prog song where it had a bunch of different parts to it that it cycled between. And so while it was cycling between all those different parts, I would just kind of felt like I had like a big diverse soundtrack to listen to, sort of. And so like that was like what I would listen to while I was playing. There we go. While I was playing World of Warcraft back when I was in like that was vanilla WoW. That was Burning Crusade wasn't even out yet. I was playing WoW back then. Nowadays I play it kind of out of familiarity and habit, I guess, when I'm in no brain mode like now. Dilly dally shilly shally. That's password number 2. Gotta get back on my thought process. Anyway, Final Fantasy 15 came out, and you know what? Things were looking up for a while. Things were looking pretty up. I liked the dudes. I like my little 4-player squad. I'll call them the squad. It's an appropriate term for that group of people. Noctis and Reno and Rude and Orin. That's their names. Shit, what are their names? Prompto, Ignis, and Lagiolus, right? Did I do it? I think I did it. I'm so proud of me. I think I actually got their names. Driving around, just cruising around with those dudes, having little interactions, cooking food. Ha! I've got the new recipe. All that shit. Killing some monsters, doing weird, wacky teleport moves, and so on. It's like, oh, this is kind of fun. Kind of game for this. I could burn through a couple dozen hours of this, just kind of fucking off. It was fine. Cracks started to show. So I tried to do the entire open world everything before continuing with the story. I tried to do all of the side content available to me, as I often do in these RPG playthroughs. And most of the time, just kind of having a pleasant time. Oh, there's chocobos now. I get to hear the new version of the chocobo theme, and it's like a whole like orchestra is playing it, and it's like really, really pleasant to listen to. Oh, now do this objective, do that objective. Oh, Sid's happy with me. She wants the part for her thing or whatever. Sydney, what's her name? Did they give her a girl Sid name? I don't remember if that was the thing they were going for. So like I was having a chill time, but cracks started to show. Because I started to do some of the harder dungeons, and there was a lot of enemies that would just like one-shot your entire party, and like you would just have to like heal through it with your massive pool of resurrection items, because the combat and the inventory was like in no way is really balanced, so you can kind of just like base tank really difficult fights and get obliterated and not really know why you're getting obliterated or how to fix the fact that you're getting obliterated, but still be perfectly capable. That guy just fucking one-shot that guy, what the hell? But you'd still be perfectly capable of like just healing through it with your 1 million Phoenix Downs and just keep getting back up until finally the boss died. But also like when things would attack you, I was becoming more aware of the fact that like the combat was so awkward. I eventually learned, like, I think after I beat the game, that you could just hold down the attack button and Noctis would just run up to enemies and auto-attack them. So it's not even just one button combat, but like, not even mashing a button combat. You could just hold down the attack button and Noctis would just kind of acquire a target, run up to him, and beat him to death, and then acquire a new target and run up to them and beat them to death. And so you could actually just hold down one button to make the entire fight happen. And that might have described part of why the combat felt so bad, is maybe it's because he was trying to control like that. But like when I'm used to games like Dark Souls, where like I press a button and an attack happens, and then I press a button and a roll happens, and then like each button leads to a concrete response, and like if an attack comes at me, I'm expected to be able to reasonably avoid it or whatnot. Like, I found that the moment-to-moment combat was so muddy in its controls and so floaty and unresponsive that like there was a dodge button and a block button and an attack button and a teleport button, I guess. But aside from maybe the teleport button, none of them would reliably just work when you press them. It was often like a suggestion. It felt like Dragon Age Inquisition when you try to control your party members that you're not currently playing as, and you're trying to give them orders and hoping they'll follow them, but maybe their AI will just take over and do something else instead. Like, that felt like what it was like to play as Noctis in Final Fantasy 15. Like, he was so floaty and awkward and unresponsive that, like, whenever a big dude would be like, haha, here comes the big attack, and I'm like, oh, I gotta get out of the way. It often felt like maybe I wasn't even supposed to be able to get out of the way, because like maybe that's just not in his moveset. Because like he was so unresponsive that it felt like I would just take damage that was unavoidable in many cases. But I'd get mixed feedback because I was like, well, but like I can't survive. Like if I'm taking chip damage, I'm like, maybe I'll be like, oh, maybe you're not supposed to be able to avoid it. Because like it's just damage that's happening. You gotta damage them down before they can damage you down. Like in a normal turn-based RPG where you just stand there and just take hits to the face. So maybe that's what it's like. But no, they're one-shotting me. Like how do if they're doing incredibly devastating damage and I have a dodge button, surely I should be able to like dodge. But like moment to moment, like the idea of controlling him in any way that was anything like how you can control characters in similar action games like Dark Souls or Devil May Cry, which are not similar to each other, but you know what I mean, third-person action games where you have control of a character who can dodge and whatnot, and like you're expected to be able to dodge. I found that largely Noctis just could not control like any of his competitors could, no matter what direction you go with the comparison. Like if you go like character action game or other clunky Western RPGs, or other like clunky, like I'm a heavy dude that has animation priority and moves slowly and whatnot. Like, I don't think Noctis even compared favorably to like Monster Hunter characters in responsiveness. Like he was kind of a nightmare, and it was supposed to. And I think the reason was because it was supposed to be flashy, mindless combat that you didn't really engage with that heavily. And if anything was ever tough, you were probably supposed to just leave and like grind and come back or something. Because like there just wasn't that much to the combat, and the more I spent with it, the more it felt like combat was just kind of a chore that I kind of got through just to see the next moment that made the boys happy, because I had these happy boys and I wanted my boys to be happy. It was the opposite of Final Fantasy XIII's problem, where I didn't like the combat at all really anymore, and it wasn't really engaging, but I liked my boys. Unlike the Final Fantasy XIII party, I liked all four of the protagonist crew in Final Fantasy XV, and I wanted the best for them. And so I was kind of just happy to do things that made them happy, and kind of just do stuff for that purpose and so on. This all comes crashing down. Because they decided to make an open world RPG, but also a linear Final Fantasy RPG in the same game. So what they did is you have to do the entire narrative, you have to do the entirety of all the open world in the first, like, third of the narrative. You're like, we're on a road trip, we're gonna get married, man, Noctis, let's go on this road trip. And narratively, almost nothing happens during that road trip. You just gotta go from one area of the continent to another area of the continent, and that's the open world. And then, boy, does the story kick off the moment you arrive at your destination, which surprisingly resulted in you leaving the open world forever, and you never go back canonically. When you go to inns, you can time travel back to when you used to be in the open world and go do more open world stuff, but canonically all that stuff takes place during that time, and it's just implied that, oh no, actually we did this too, I forgot to tell you. Because once you leave the open world at the beginning of the narrative, you never go back again, because that open world was actually completely divorced from the narrative of the game in almost every conceivable way. It really was just a fuck-off area, because like the writers just wanted to have an open world, but also wanted to make their linear Final Fantasy narrative, and instead of finding any way to make those two fit, they just didn't. They just made two separate things in one game. And boy, once you leave the open world, you're all out of positive things to say about Final Fantasy 15. It was a train wreck narratively from the beginning. Like, there's no part of the narrative of Final Fantasy 15 besides the chemistry between the protagonist characters that was good. Ever. Which is, like, impressive and an impossible feeling. And it's like, but at the same time, kind of is starting to feel like the status quo of Final Fantasy games every time. Because it keeps happening. But yeah, spoilers for Final Fantasy 15, I guess. But like, no, is it even worth spoiling Final Fantasy 15? Like, really? But like, the most important thing in the entire game is that your capital city falls, and your dad's like dead, and it's just sad, and oh no, what happened? Your home's gone. That happens like in chapter 2 or something, and like, it's entirely off camera. You get like a 10-second cutscene that's like glimpses of a bunch of little glimpses of the movie, and you're supposed to go watch a different movie to get that part of the narrative, which is bad. You're not supposed to do that. And I didn't watch the movie because they didn't even include the movie with, you know, you didn't get the movie with the game. You had to go seek it out separately, and I'm like, I don't have that movie, and I don't really want to pay for like what seems to likely be a bad movie, because there was not positive opinions about that movie. And it's like, why do I have to watch I don't really want to watch a bad movie to understand the narrative of this game. And I just kind of moved on from that because it sounded kind of awful, and I just didn't really want to engage with that. So I never watched the movie. I still haven't. Maybe they should have considered. Oh, this. Oh, I'm fucked. I just did a mistake, didn't I? Don't get seen by any of the hungry predators. Haha. I never went around to like paying a separate fee to watch a movie that completes the story of the game. I did watch the anime though. The anime episodes set up the backstory of each of the characters one by one, and it was freely available on YouTube, which is how the movie should have been if they wanted to make it part of the mandatory narrative. And it's also focused. The anime focuses on what was good about the game, which is just these 4 characters and nothing else. Which is all that they did there, was just set up all 4 of those characters more, which is kind of neat. But yeah, the people die off camera. Your entire kingdom dies off camera, which becomes the status quo of this entire franchise, basically. I mean, this entire game. Before long, you go to get married to your wife, yeah, but instead, giant elemental monster happens in town, and there's a whole thing about that. But like, this is where another crack shows in the narrative and in the gameplay design was that you get to these you fight this giant elemental monster, and there's no mechanics. They forgot to have mechanics because they wanted to be cool, and so because they were so focused on being cool, they forgot to have gameplay mechanics in their video game. So while in other games, a big RPG boss fight is like a test of all your skills and how tough your characters are, and we're gonna fight this big boss and he's gonna be the challenge. This is where all the mechanics really flex, and here we go. Instead, this giant thing just shows up, and Noctis is basically flying and just kind of keeps smacking it. And you just kind of keep smacking it and flying and smacking it and smacking it. And you're like, alright, I've been smacking it for a while. Are we good? Am I doing this right? It's one of those things like Final Fantasy, like Resident Evil 6, where like, with the bullet sponge boss fights, where you're smacking it for so long that you're genuinely starting to wonder if you're doing it right, or if like this boss has a weakness you're forgetting to do or something. And so you just kind of keep smacking him. And it's supposed to be a big, cool, hype moment, but you're bored out of your mind because you're not doing anything, and you're not really doing anything cool yourself. The game's just telling you you're cool for all the nothing you're doing, which is the least interesting way to design a boss fight, but here we are. So you just keep smacking it. You're like, I mean, I'm not sure. Something might be going wrong, but I don't know what else I could be possibly doing because like all my buttons are gone. All I can do is keep smacking them. So you keep smacking them, and eventually, oh shit, the fight's over. Oh, I guess that is what I was supposed to be doing. Oh no, that was working as intended. The part where I was really fucking bored for like 10 minutes straight. Cool. And you're supposed to be really sad that Lady died, but like you've never interacted with her before, like ever. So it's a bummer she's dead, I guess, because like people dying is sad, but like I don't know who she is, so I guess it's a bummer she died. But yeah, too bad you couldn't have spent time with like the protagonist and her. All right. Anyway, narrative becomes all about you going across the country because like these guys went after you. They killed your town, and you gotta go fight it. You gotta go back against the big bad evil empire and fight them. Grr. So you're on a long road trip to there, and you're hanging out with your buddies, and they all go through hardships one by one, but also all mysteriously leave for a bit and then come back. And you're like, that was weird. What was that? Oh, that was the DLC. We're going to be in DLC later where we have standalone episodes. So just so you know, you're not getting the whole story. You have to buy it later. I'm like, again? You already want me to buy a movie and now I have to buy DLCs to see the rest of the story too? Is this going to be like Type 0 where I have to play the game twice just to finish the story? Anyway, yeah, well, anyway, bye! You don't get to see those stories, especially since you're being the game now. So, like, I hope whatever story is in those chapters isn't that important because, it's not fucking out right now. So, you have to take the story as it is. You go on this long-ass road trip to some kingdom, and then the kingdom dies off camera. Oh, right, so your kingdom died off camera, the enemy kingdom died off camera. I guess we'll just go into the died off camera kingdom and go check it out a little deeper and see what's going on there. What's going on there? Oh, hey, it's that one, like, the villain that's been set up over and over again throughout the game that's kind of like your rival and whatnot. How's he doing? Oh, he died off camera. He's like a statue now, he's dead. What? Yeah, we're done with him. Okay, how about the leader of the enemy faction? Oh yeah, he died off camera. Maybe he's a monster now, but he died off camera. Okay. So the enemy kingdom died off camera, the enemy leader died off camera, the enemy rival died off camera. What happens now? The Sephiroth stand-in would like you to do a time travel. Not the Sephiroth stand-in from Final Fantasy 13 2 with the purple hair and the feather. Different Sephiroth stand-in. This one's quirky for different reasons. He's gonna put you in a cocoon. Fuck, it's the future now. Everyone has facial hair and maybe a missing limb or two. Damn. Oh, post-apocalyptic future. Guess what? You know the game where your kingdom died off camera and their kingdom died off camera and their leader died off camera and the rival died off camera? Well, now the world died off camera. The whole world is fucked. It also died off camera. Nothing happens when you're in the room, Noctis, even though you're the protagonist. Like, you're the most unengaged protagonist I've ever seen in a video game, I guess, because everything happens separately from you, except for the Tempest fight, I guess. You know, the one where I was the one that was unengaged, because while you were fully involved, I was just holding the attack button for like 10 minutes straight, while frankly not even always looking at the camera, because looking at the screen, because what was on it wasn't interesting. Cool. So the entire world is dead off camera. If there's, the last of your friends that have survived are all like hanging out in an encampment together, being all like, be like, wow, you're back, but also, yeah, the world's sad now. It's time to get the band together for one final showdown against the Sephiroth stand-in for this game. I guess he either recruited or is working for Ifrit or something. So yeah, just go back to your town that died off camera at the beginning of the game. Just go fight Sephiroth in the sky for a while. It'll be a lot like Advent Children, but now, like, they made it this year, so like that means it's new and different. But it's a lot like Advent Children fight. And then you beat him and you're like, cool, I did it? And then the narrative ends, and you're like, this was like, oh, this was so disappointing. And you tricked me into liking it. I didn't like liking it. Why did you, why don't? Why did you? No, I feel betrayed this time. See, the other Final Fantasies I didn't like, I never liked, so I was just like, this game sucks. It's fine. I'm used to games sucking. It can happen. But like Final Fantasy 15 tricked me into enjoying it, and then just like shat on me for liking it ever. Like, ha, you idiot, you liked this game. Anyway, we didn't try. We fuck you for playing it. That's without me even mentioning the fucking chapter 13 Noctis chapter where you're running through hallways all disoriented and alone, and you play it for like 3 hours, and there's basically zero gameplay mechanics, and the villain is just flatly taunting you the same way over and over again for hours, and you're bored out of your mind because the gameplay is bad and the narrative is bad, and you're just like, that's the moment where they'd lock you in prison long enough for you to really crystallize just how bad the narrative has gotten, and you're like, all you can think about is how bad the story is now, and you're just like living in it. It was like it's like they specially designed a hell for their own players, was chapter 13, just to punish them for coming this far. And it was astonishing. Like, it was excruciating. But basically the entire narrative from the moment you leave the open world, which is to say basically the entire narrative, was just pulling teeth and then laughing at you for expecting anything else. Like, it sucked. It sucked so bad that I briefly convinced myself I kind of liked this thing, and then I just got punished repeatedly. Like, it was basically Game of Thrones in a microcosm of like, oh yeah, this open world, this is the first 4 seasons, and then this whole linear part, that's the last 4 seasons, and this chapter 13, this is season 8, motherfucker. Buckle up, buckaroos. And it's like, I don't want to be here anymore. Can I go home? I would like to go home now, please. I don't want to play Final Fantasy anymore. So that's where we left off with Final Fantasy. So as you can imagine, when everyone's playing Final Fantasy VII and hyping it up and constantly talking about it everywhere I go, I'm conflicted. Because on one hand, it's like, this is the most famous Final Fantasy ever. It's Final Fantasy VII, isn't it great? But like, one thing is, until I play Final Fantasy VII all the way through from scratch, I don't know if I'll even like the original Final Fantasy VII in the first place, because I've basically, I like basically no, I like basically no Final Fantasy games. Like, it's not a good success rate. Like, I still need to go back and play Final Fantasy X as an adult with much more exposure to games to see if I would even like that game or not. But I'm holding out hope and all that. Like, you know, maybe. But like, I don't know if I would like the original Final Fantasy VII, let alone the remake, which is made by the people who have, like, is modern Square Enix, which, from my standing, hasn't made a single good game for almost 20 years. Because let's not even get started on Kingdom Hearts, which I'm like, what the fuck is this franchise? That whole narrative is ass. Like, Kingdom Hearts, no. All the modern Final Fantasy games, no. Maybe 14 has good stuff going on in it or something. And I didn't play 12, so, you know, maybe we can be more conservative with our numerical estimate. Let's just say that they're a company that hasn't made a good game for 10 or 15 years or something. It's a very long time to keep holding out hope for a company that just keeps putting out ass. Like, I had a period where BioWare was a company I would say was my favorite video game company, but after Andromeda and Anthem coming out, I'm relatively ready to write them off and not treat anything that they put out as being like a surefire thing, if you know what I mean. But like, Final Fantasy is, for me, and Square Enix for me, is a company that hasn't put out a single good thing for basically my entire adult life. And so like, even if Final Fantasy VII was like the best game ever made, Final Fantasy VII Remake is being made by the people who made all the bad games. So I'm immediately like, why would I trust this? I don't trust this at all. And on top of that, every other one else on the planet is playing Final Fantasy VII Remake. So like, a lot of you were just watching other people play it anyway. And I don't know if I'll like it. And if you guys like it, like, I don't want to take that away from you. Go ahead and just like it. That's fine. My opinions are my own and all that. That's how all this works. But like, that doesn't. But like, if people keep saying they like it so much, I don't know if I want to be that guy. You know what I mean? Like, if I play Final Fantasy VII, I'm just going to be that guy who is just the stick in the mud, telling everyone they're wrong about the thing they like, which, you know, to be clear, is always just my opinion, obviously, and not me saying you're wrong to like a thing, but just, it's me disagreeing. That's all it is. People act like I'm like telling them they're wrong to like things and I'm taking it from them or something. I'm like, no, that's not the point. But like, generally speaking, the people who watch a playthrough of a game live in two camps. Or there's three camps. There's the people who are like, oh, they just want to see a bad thing ripped apart. Or in the case of things that are very clearly bad, which is not necessarily what this is. Then there's the people that like are the fans, the genuine fans of the thing that want to see the thing, which is like, it's why I'm iffy whenever I play a game like Zero Escape or Phoenix Wright or Metroid Prime or Mario. It doesn't really come up with Mario. I don't have things to say about Mario really. Or Zelda, where like if I criticize it in any way, people become incredibly hyper defensive about it and insulting and rude and mean in the comments. Because like people just can't take any criticism in many cases of said thing. And so going at a thing with an existing fan base, like Final Fantasy VII totally feels like it's going to be another one of those things where it's like the existing fan base will not respond well to me criticizing anything about anything in the thing. And I'm already going into this as somebody who historically doesn't like this kind of stuff basically ever. So it's likely, it's the likely outcome if I play Final Fantasy VII, that I will be very iffy about a lot of the elements of how it's handled, and just won't be the target audience for it, I guess, or whatever. And so I'm just really iffy about a lot of these ideas. And there's a little bit of confirmation going on right now, and maybe you can accuse that of being confirmation bias or whatever, but I'm seeing the discourse of this game shift. Because it was like completely glowing at first, it seemed, but over time it feels like people are now turning around and like actually it seems like the opinion is souring over Final Fantasy VII's remake. And so I can't help but think that maybe this might also be one of those things where the popular opinion goes into a sadder place over time. And we might still be in like the afterglow moment, like the honeymoon, where it's like the hype is so current and we're still currently having the thing come out. And you know, the Phantom Menace is coming out right now and we all love it because it's more Star Wars. Yay, hype, hype, hype. But then like as like the months and years roll by, then we're then like, oh, you know what? Maybe BioShock Infinite sucks. And various other things where like the hype can burn, just blot out all criticism for certain things. But then like the audience themselves that were then so defensive about the thing a year later sometimes are then like, actually no, that was a bad one, no, because they start thinking about it. It's that like outside of the theater moment where like when I watched Prometheus live, I liked a lot of the movie Prometheus, but then as I was driving home, questions started to bubble up. And by the time I had arrived at home, I was like, oh no, is Prometheus bad? And then over the months and years since Prometheus came out, there was lots of like, oh no, Prometheus. And like that kind of thing kind of happens with this kind of hype cycle where sometimes this thing's so popular and then it turns around and then people have all these massive issues with elements of it. I don't know. I don't have a grand conclusion to have here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a poll. Hooray. A poll. I find this appalling. There's a link in the description to a poll. about what are your informed opinions about what you think I should do here? Which is like, how should I frame that? I haven't fully thought this through, I guess. I'm supposed to be burning stuff. I was like kind of looking around for my objective a little bit. What are these guys all fighting? Just here to burn their houses like an asshole. Whee! Oh, did that wrong. I think I'm supposed to burn their houses. It's called the World of Warcraft, so it's time to do some World of War crimes. I'm a bad person. Oh well, I'm the Horde. Not that the Alliance is great either. I'm contemplating whether I should do like a complicated poll of like put a gun up to the head of 2 games and be like, which one do I play? Which one do I play? Like put it in like high stakes definite terms of like, Final Fantasy VII Remake or Knights of the Old Republic. Here we fucking go. Pick one. The other one burns. But probably not. Then part of me was also thinking Final Fantasy VII Remake or Final Fantasy VII. Which one should I play? But that doesn't erase the fact that half this video, or most of this video, was me about outlining my issues with Final Fantasy in general. More so than Final Fantasy VII Remake specifically. And how, like, that applies still. Like, I'm still kind of concerned that I won't like Final Fantasy VII in general. And so I don't necessarily want to play that right now either, if I'm going to play it ever. Also, I just finished Yakuza 0, which was a Yakuza 3, which was a JRPG. So I don't want my next... I want JRPGs to be a relatively infrequent thing. It's one thing when I'm like, time to play the new hotness to grow the channel, in the case of 7 Remake. But as far as like digging through the archive and just looking for a JRPG to play, I'm not going to do that now. Because like, I just played a shooter RPG followed by a JRPG in the case of Yakuza 3. And I'm now wrapping the shooter RPG back up because it was a game-breaking bug that was holding me back for a while. But I can now go back and do it. This quest doesn't seem to be working very well, or I'm doing it wrong, I don't know. But the, yeah. Aside from the hype of the remake, I don't really want to play another JRPG right now. So my next target would probably be something else. I just did a shooter RPG, so I'd probably play like an action RPG or a CRPG. Just kind of pivot around back and forth, but you know, no promises. I need to review my list and make a nice big choice. I get to make choices about what game to play next less and less frequently. So I want to be like careful and really consider whatever I want to play next. And since I have a decent amount of freedom in this particular slot, I'm gonna really like just feel it out and just kind of pick whatever game feels right. Which maybe it'll be a classic RPG, something from like the 90s to the 2000s that's like further back, or a throwback. Or maybe it'll be one of the ones that came out over the last year or two that I just haven't quite gotten to, like Greedfall or something. Or maybe it'll be a sequel to another RPG I've already played, or prequel. Because I can play Dragon Age Origins, or I can play Witcher 1 to try to finish my original goal of playing all the Witcher and Dragon Age games. Probably not Deus Ex, because I just played a shooter RPG. But I can go weird with it. Or play something weird from my childhood, like Summoner 2. I've got some like old console games I've been stocking up to play as like classic RPGs one day. I don't know. I don't have an answer for what I'll play next. So that's going to be what the poll is, I think. So it's just Final Fantasy VII Remake or any other RPG. That's the possibility. That's the opening. I don't know what it'll be. Could be all sorts of things, but that's ultimately the opportunity cost back and forth. Is should I go pick something else to play when I'm done with Outer Worlds, sorry, or should I play Final Fantasy VII Remake? That's the stakes here, and I don't know how much longer Outer Worlds is. I feel like I'm on this last planet or something, but I don't actually know if that's true or not. But that's the thing. I'm gonna finish Outer Worlds, and then I'm gonna pick the next game for the RPG slot. It can be Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it can be something else. And I've got mixed feelings, and I think I'd prefer something else, but like if the demand is there and you guys like are sure you want me to play the Final Fantasy VII Remake, then I'll give it a go. And you know what? Like, I want games to be good. I don't want Final Fantasy VII Remake to be bad. So like if I play it, like I'll give it an honest go and I'll be like, let's check this game out. Hope I love it. And maybe it'll surprise me, or maybe it won't. Maybe I'll bring all new criticisms to the table from my own particular flavor of the angle I attack these things at or whatever. Maybe I will have some kind of interesting take along the way that makes the playthrough interesting. Or maybe I'll just be spitting in the face of people that like the thing over and over again, because that's what it can feel like sometimes. And I don't, that's the thing, is I just don't, that's the point of this video, is that what you want? Is this your goal? Because I just want to be clear as possible about what we're getting ourselves into if I play the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's just like the context, the full context, the 2-hour podcast context, apparently, of how I'm feeling about this going in, and how I feel about the other games in this series, and whether or not I'm really the person you want to watch play this game or not, or if that's a mistake. Because, like, you know, if we're all informed, then it's like, that's the choice we made. And then when people are getting mad at me, if we are playing it, if people are getting mad at me about my takes or whatever, and why are you even playing this if you don't like it, or whatever the hell's going on, if it, you know, if in the specific situation where, like, we're playing it and it's going badly, as I worry it might, and so on, then I can point them at this video and be like, fucking, there's your context. That's the fucking informed choice that the audience made. I warned them at great lengths, and they were like, no, it's worth it. Final Fantasy VII is worth it. Also, there's part of me that's conflicted about the fact that it's not the full story, which I guess not everyone knew going in, which is interesting. I heard about it years ago that they're going to make it episodic, but to be fair, they did kind of like falsely advertise it a bit by like just calling it Final Fantasy VII Remake, which would imply it's a remake of all of Final Fantasy VII, when it's actually the opening act of Final Fantasy VII, which was like 6 hours long apparently, which is like stretched out for like 40 or 50 hours. So it's lots of narrative filler, because they have the skeleton of a story that has to play out this way, but tons of like intermixed filler that like wants to sound important in the moment, but can't actually affect the overall trajectory of that skeleton, because that skeleton is still where it's all going or whatever. So that seems complicated and iffy, but I don't know. We'll see. We shall see. So yeah, link in the description. Go vote. Go ahead and enter your passwords. Hope you wrote them down. I'll have to check them manually, because that has to be a text input. If it's misspelled, that's fine. If I can tell that what you meant or whatever, then that's fine. But it's just like, I want to filter out people that just are ignoring me, because, you know, that's not informed consent. That's just you blindly saying the same answer you were saying before this, when the whole goal of this is to be context, which will filter down our data set, but, you know, it'll be fun. But there's nothing perfect. Like, the very fact that I'm making this about Final Fantasy and discussing stuff for a long time makes itself, like, it makes it like gathering data is difficult, and the fact that I've done this makes this a thing where, like, how do I put it? Mathematically, I'm potentially biasing my data in favor of Final Fantasy VII fans, because the other people might just not sit through this in the first place. But it is also Final Fantasy VII fans that have sat through me saying all this stuff and know all this context, so they're still making a choice based on that information. So I don't know. I think that's all I gotta say today. Yeah. This if you're watching this and you're a Patreon supporter, I think this is gonna take the place of the Patreon video for this week. Which, you know, I just take a week off every now and then anyway, periodically. And I think this is fitting replacement, because it's a podcast talking while I'm playing WoW thing. It just doesn't always fit the schedule to do it. But I'm also running low on questions. I've been productive lately, I guess, and I've gotten through a lot of the questions. So the Q&A it could use some more questions anyway, so giving people another week to submit more of them is probably plenty helpful too. So there's that. So yeah, just go. This video's over. I was tempted to make another question, but I basically already said the video is over, so I can't make another. Sorry, another password. I think I found the one hut finally. I can't add another password now because I basically already told people to go vote, so they may have already left. So just the 2 passwords. And this will determine whether I play Final Fantasy VII after Outer Worlds, or if I go just play some other RPG, because that's what the time slot is. It's the RPG time slot, so that's the only known element of it. And you know, I'll try to make it good. Like whatever choice I pick, I have to live with for months. So generally speaking, I want to have a great time. So it's a tough choice between like all these classic things that I want to get to eventually versus like more recent stuff that I've fallen behind on and so on. But like, and then also some Hail Marys of like, what if I try out the Gothic franchise? I just gasped in simultaneous with somebody in the audience that also wants that to happen. But I'll try to make it good if the choice is mine, which it always technically is. But you know, I just want to give the people a fair shake because I'm getting asked constantly to play Final Fantasy VII, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. And hey, if I don't play Final Fantasy VII, once again, you can go to the Birdcatcher's YouTube channel. Let me double check his URL. YouTube.com/user/birdcatchergames. I had to remember if it was Birdcatcher Games or Birdcatcher LP. I think Birdcatcher LP is Bird's Twitch account. But yeah, Bird, I mean, we're not the same person, so maybe it's not the same thing for you and it's not enough or whatever, but like, we have similarities in presentation and personality at times, and other things that are different. So, you know, it might be a good substitute to watch him play Final Fantasy VII, which he's already doing. Let's see. As of the time I'm recording this at, he has 19 episodes up already, all of which are about 20 minutes long or something. He has a different episode structure than I do. But yeah, he's 20 episodes deep. So if you want to go check out Final Fantasy VII Remake right now with Bird, just go on over there. Go check out his playthrough. And maybe that's enough of a replacement that it's all the better for me to play something else instead of the same thing. I've kind of liked the fact that lately where the two of us are playing different games, except for when we play the same game together. Because his recent games are Final Fantasy VII Remake, Doom Eternal, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and I didn't play any of those games. I wanted to play all of them, but just didn't quite get around to them. Still might get to Doom or Jedi someday, but it's just looking less and less likely. But like, Jedi is one of those, sometimes called a Souls-like, and that perks my curiosity. And I've also heard that's a better story than the most recent Star Wars movie, which also piques my curiosity, because it could be good to have a palate cleanser. And Doom Eternal, you know, Doom 2016 was really good. Doom Eternal's another game I wanted to play, but played Resident Evil 3 because that's what won the poll, and I also wanted to play Resident Evil 3, so there's that, and I also wanted to play Neo 2 and Surge 2, and yeah, see, that's the issue. These games always pile up too fast and keep going and going and going and going and going. Any closing thoughts? Trying to think if I wanted to say anything else going out of this. Let's just see how well I do the skydiving moment here. Woo! This is a bad idea, but I have a grappling hook. Oh, I'm not gonna make it low enough. Fuck. That was embarrassing. Woo! That's what I wanted to do the first time, but cooler. Because my grappling hook cancels fall damage on my little goblin. My little goblin boy. With piercing blue eyes. Purple eyes. I don't know why I said blue. Am I having a stroke? Oh, right. Do not spoil the passwords. That's what I meant to say. If I see people posting the passwords, they would be punishment. I don't know, it depends on how I'm feeling. It's kind of malicious to do. It could lead to either the comment being deleted, which is some vanilla shit. That's baby shit. Or it might lead to a comment shadow ban. Like, you might get banned from commenting on my channel indefinitely, which means forever, basically. So don't fucking spoil the passwords, dummy. obviously don't spoil the passwords. 'Cause I clearly, like, that's the whole point of this whole thing. Obviously, I don't want you just to go into my own comment section and subvert the entire practice, even if you don't, even if you personally think it's dumb or whatever. Don't just fucking like break the mechanism by spoiling the passwords. That's malicious. That's intentionally malicious. And that's the kind of thing that deserves a comment ban. So don't do that. See ya.